Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going all the way back to ancient Rome to explore the life of an emperor who's, he doesn't get nearly as much attention as some of his more notorious relatives, but trust me, his story is packed with just as much intrigue.
Oh yeah, definitely. We're talking about Emperor Claudius, a figure who often gets overshadowed by the likes of Caligula and Nero.
Exactly. But as we're going to see, Claudius's story is full of twists and turns, and it really challenges those preconceived notions we might have about what it meant to be a Roman emperor.
Absolutely. And we have a fantastic YouTube video from the channel Mirandol to guide us on this deep dive. They do a really great job piecing together the evidence from Claudius's reign and challenging the traditional narrative that's often portrayed him as weak or incompetent.
Right. So before we get into all that, let's set the stage a bit. We're in Rome around the time of the birth of Christ, and Claudius is part of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. You know, the Roman royal family descended from Augustus, the first emperor.
Yep. But even with that impressive pedigree, Claudius wasn't exactly seen as emperor material. He was known more for his love of books and history than for, political scheming or military prowess.
Not exactly the gladiator type, huh?
No, not really. In fact, some sources from the time describe him as physically awkward and maybe even a bit sickly. Not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think of a powerful Roman emperor, right?
Definitely not. But then things take a wild turn. Caligula, the reigning emperor, and Claudius's nephew is assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard.
Oh yeah, that was a major turning point. And for those who might not be familiar with Roman history, the Praetorian Guard were basically the emperor's elite bodyguards. So imagine the chaos this assassination caused.
Total power vacuum.
Right. And what happens next is truly remarkable. Instead of choosing a more obvious successor, the Praetorians decide to proclaim Claudius emperor.
Wait, what?
Yep, you heard that right. And this had never happened before in Roman history. It really throws a wrench in that whole weak and bumbling image of Claudius, doesn't it?
For sure. I mean, to secure the support of the Praetorian Guard like that, he must have been doing some serious maneuvering behind the scenes. So overnight, this scholar becomes the most powerful man in Rome. What did he do with that power once he had it?
Well, one of the first things Claudius does is launch a massive building program. We're talking infrastructure projects on a grand scale. He builds aqueducts like the Aqua Claudia and the Aqua Virgo that bring fresh water into Rome.
And get this, parts of those aqueducts are still functioning today. They feed those iconic Roman fountains we all see in pictures and movies, like the Trevi Fountain.
That's right, so think about it. Some of the water flowing through the Trevi Fountain has traveled miles thanks to an aqueduct built by Claudius almost 2,000 years ago. It's incredible when you think about the engineering and manpower that went into these projects.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about beautifying the city. These aqueducts had a huge practical impact. They improved sanitation, reduced disease, and ensured a reliable water supply for a growing population. Talk about understanding the needs of the people.
Exactly. And these projects also solidified Claudius's popularity. He showed the Roman people that he could provide for them. And that was really important for any emperor who wanted to stay in power.
Makes sense. The video also mentioned that Claudius built a new harbor at Ostia, right?
He did. Ostia was Rome's main seaport, vital for trade and for bringing in grain to feed the city. Expanding the harbor there shows that Claudius really understood the importance of logistics and economics.
So he wasn't just focused on those big splashy projects. He was strategically strengthening Rome's position in the Mediterranean.
Exactly. He recognized that Rome's power wasn't just about military might. It was also about having a strong and stable economy.
Right. But speaking of military might, Claudius wasn't afraid to flex his muscles when he needed to. He actually expanded the Roman Empire, right?
He did. He successfully annexed Mauritania in North Africa, which brought valuable resources and strategic territory under Roman control. But perhaps his most ambitious military campaign was the conquest of Britain.
Ah, yes, Britain. The land that had even given Julius Caesar trouble. That must have been a major undertaking.
Oh, it was. And it earned Claudius the title Britannicus, which was a pretty impressive badge of honor in those days.
So he was a builder, an administrator, and a conqueror. Not bad for a guy who was supposedly weak and awkward.
Not bad at all. But here's what's really interesting. Alongside these traditional displays of Roman power, Claudius also made some surprisingly progressive moves. He was much more forward-thinking than he's often given credit for.
Progressive? How so?
Well, one of the most fascinating pieces of evidence we have is something called the Lion Tablet. It's a bronze inscription of a speech Claudius gave arguing in favor of granting Roman citizenship to prominent Gauls from present-day France.
Wow. Granting citizenship to people from conquered territories? That was pretty radical for the time, wasn't it?
It was incredibly forward-thinking. The Roman Senate at the time was very resistant to the idea. They saw it as a dilution of Roman identity. But Claudius argued that incorporating these Gauls, particularly those who had proven their loyalty and ability, would strengthen the empire in the long run.
So he saw the value in a more multicultural empire. He recognized the talent and potential that existed beyond Rome's traditional borders.
Exactly. And this really challenges that image of Claudius as a stuffy traditionalist. He was actually a pretty shrewd politician who was willing to make bold moves to strengthen the empire.
It's amazing how much we can learn about a historical figure just by digging a little deeper and looking beyond those surface-level judgments.
Absolutely. And Claudius's story is a great reminder that history is full of surprises, and sometimes the people who seem the most unlikely can end up making the biggest impact.
Okay, so we've talked about Claudius the Builder and the Conqueror, but now let's dive into the juicier third of things. His personal life, Roman emperors were not exactly known for their quiet domestic lives, right?
Oh no, definitely not. Their personal lives were often just as dramatic and turbulent as their reigns, and Claudius is no exception.
So let's talk about his wives. He was married 4 times, right? But the 2 marriages that really stand out are his marriages to Messalina and Agrippina the Younger.
Yes, those are the ones that really capture the imagination. And for good reason. Both of these women were incredibly powerful and influential figures in their own right.
Messalina, that name definitely rings a bell. Wasn't she known for being a bit, a bit scandalous?
She had quite the reputation. Roman historians, many of whom were writing after Claudius's death, painted her as a woman driven by insatiable desires and a thirst for power. They accused her of adultery scheming and even plotting against Claudius.
Now, we have to be careful with these ancient sources, right? There was a lot of political maneuvering and mudslinging back then, so some of these stories about Messalina could have been exaggerated or even fabricated to damage Claudius's reputation.
Absolutely, we always have to consider the biases of our sources. Who was writing these accounts? And what were their motivations? Could some of these stories have been spread to make Claudius look weak or easily manipulated?
It's definitely possible. So maybe Messalina was less of a power-hungry schemer and more of a convenient scapegoat for those who wanted to undermine Claudius.
That's a very real possibility. But even if we acknowledge that bias, she still must have been a pretty formidable woman to become the subject of such salacious tales.
Oh, for sure. So what ultimately happened to her?
Well, her story ends tragically. She was eventually executed accused of treason against Claudius.
Wow. So was she actually guilty of treason, or was this just a way to get rid of a perceived threat?
It's hard to say for sure. The evidence is murky and there were different interpretations of the events. But her death certainly had a major impact on Claudius and his reign.
So after Messalina is out of the picture, Claudius marries again. This time it's Agrippina the Younger. Now, she wasn't just another Roman noblewoman, was she?
No, not at all. Agrippina was Claudius's own niece, a descendant of Augustus on her mother's side. So he came from a very powerful branch of the family and was known for her intelligence and ambition.
And marrying Claudius was a strategic move for her, right? It gave her a direct path to influence and, more importantly, a way to secure the throne for her son Nero.
You're exactly right. And that's where things get really interesting because Claudius already had a son, Britannicus, from a previous marriage. So now you have 2 potential heirs to the throne, which sets the stage for a power struggle that would have major consequences for the future of Rome.
It sounds like Agrippina was playing the long game here, using her marriage to Claudius to position Nero for power. Was Claudius aware of her ambitions?
That's a question historians still debate. Some believe Claudius was completely under Agrippina's thumb, a puppet emperor manipulated by his ambitious wife.
Yeah, he doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to wives controlling him.
Right, but others argue that he was more savvy than he's often given credit for. Perhaps he was even using Agrippina's ambition to further his own goals.
Interesting. It's fascinating to think about the power dynamics at play here, especially given Claudius's efforts to be more inclusive and reform-minded. Did those efforts continue under Agrippina's influence?
It's hard to say for sure. The historical record from this period is, as always, a bit murky. But what we do know is that Claudius's reign takes a sudden and dramatic turn with his death.
Right, his death. It's always been shrouded in mystery, hasn't it? What do the sources tell us about how Claudius died?
Well, according to the accounts we have, Claudius died at a banquet after consuming poisoned mushrooms.
Poison mushrooms, seriously? That sounds like something straight out of a Shakespearean play. Was it an accident, or was there something more sinister going on?
Most historians believe it was an assassination, and Agrippina is the prime suspect. After all, Nero, her son, stood to gain the most from Claudius's death.
And with Nero in power, Agrippina would have been the most powerful woman in Rome. It does all seem a bit too convenient, doesn't it? But if this what Agrippina's doing, she certainly played her cards well.
She did. But even in death, Claudius continued to be a pawn in the game of imperial power. After his death, Nero, likely at the urging of Agrippina, had Claudius deified.
Deified? You mean made into a god? Why would he do that?
Well, in Roman culture, deifying an emperor was a way to legitimize the new ruler. It linked him to the divine and to the legacy of his predecessors. It was a way of saying, hey, the gods approve of this new guy, so you should too.
So even in death, Claudius was still being used to bolster someone else's authority. That's quite a twist. But what about Claudius's own legacy beyond all these power struggles? What did he leave behind?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll be exploring in our final segment. Because despite the drama and intrigue that often overshadow his reign, Claudius left a lasting impact on the Roman Empire. His contributions go far beyond his building projects and military campaigns. He was a reformer, an administrator, and in many ways a surprisingly modern emperor.
So we've covered a lot of ground with Claudius. The builder, the conqueror, the husband, the victim of, possible poisoning. But it sounds like there's more to his story, right? Like he wasn't just reacting to events, he was actually trying to shape the empire in some pretty significant ways.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that really sets Claudius apart is his attention to detail when it comes to running the empire. He wasn't just a figurehead. He was deeply involved in the day-to-day business of governing.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily expect an emperor, especially one with a scholarly background, to really relish the nitty-gritty of bureaucracy.
Right, but it seems like Claudius had a genuine passion for organization and efficiency. He streamlined the bureaucracy, reformed the legal system, and even made some significant changes to the way the empire was administered.
Okay, so give us some specifics. What kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, one of the most notable things he did was elevate the role of freedmen in the government.
Freedmen. Now, just to remind everyone, freedmen were people who had previously been enslaved but had gained their freedom.
Exactly. And Claudius saw their potential and started appointing them to positions of authority within the imperial administration.
That's pretty remarkable considering the rigid social hierarchy of Roman society. I imagine there was some pushback from the traditional elite.
Oh, there definitely was. Many senators saw it as a threat to their own power and status. But Claudius was pragmatic. He recognized that these freedmen were often highly skilled and educated, and he valued their loyalty. After all, they had benefited directly from his policies.
It sounds like he was willing to challenge the status quo if it meant improving the efficiency of the empire. What about his policies towards the provinces? We talked earlier about his decision to grant citizenship to some Gauls. Did he do anything else to try to integrate the different parts of the empire?
Well, Claudius understood that a strong empire depended on the well-being of its provinces. So he invested heavily in infrastructure projects, building roads, aqueducts, and harbors throughout the empire.
So he was literally building bridges across the empire.
Exactly. And he also paid close attention to the needs and concerns of the provinces. He established new systems for resolving disputes, addressed issues of taxation, and made sure that provincial voices were heard in Rome.
So despite the scandals and the power struggles, it seems like Claudius's reign was actually a period of growth and stability for the Roman Empire. He really seems to have left a lasting impact.
He did. His building projects, his military victories, his administrative reforms, and even his more inclusive policies all contributed to shaping the Roman world. He was in many ways a surprisingly modern emperor, someone who understood that true power comes not just from military might, but also from smart governance, strategic investments, and a willingness to embrace diversity.
It's a powerful reminder that history is full of surprises. The awkward, bookish scholar, often dismissed and underestimated, turned out to be a shrewd leader who left a significant mark on one of the greatest empires in history.
His story is a testament to the fact that leadership can come from unexpected places, and that those who may seem unassuming can achieve extraordinary things.
Well, I think we can all agree that we've learned a lot about Emperor Claudius today. He's definitely a figure worth revisiting and reevaluating. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life of this often overlooked but ultimately fascinating Roman emperor.
It's been a pleasure exploring his story with you. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the hidden stories of history. You never know what you might find.